Most people recite this chapter without ever realizing that it was revealed to a tribe standing on the edge of collapse. A tribe that should not have survived, should not have prospered, and should not have been safe, yet somehow stood untouched while the world around them burned. Surah Quraysh is short, but it carries the weight of survival, divine protection, and a warning that is easy to miss if you rush past its words. Before we go any further, thank you for watching Islamic Insight channel. Tell us in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love learning about Islam and the hidden depth of the Quran, subscribe and stay with us. Surah Quraysh opens quietly, almost gently, but that softness is deceptive. It speaks to a people who had just witnessed a miracle so overwhelming that Arabia would talk about it for generations. An army with elephants had marched to destroy the Kaaba, the heart of their city, and without the Quraysh lifting a single sword, Allah erased that army completely. Birds from the sky became soldiers, and a superpower collapsed outside the sanctuary. That event alone should have shaken the Quraysh to their core. Instead, life continued. Markets reopened. Caravans departed. Comfort returned. And it is precisely at this moment that Allah addresses them, not with thunder, but with reminder. This surah does not shout. It does something more dangerous. It calmly asks them to look at their own lives and explain how they are still standing. The Quraysh were not just another Arab tribe. They were the people of the sacred house, descendants of Ismail through the line of Adnan, carriers of a legacy tied directly to Ibrahim. Among the tribes of Arabia, their name carried weight. When they spoke, others listened. When they traveled, roads opened. When conflict erupted, they were often spared. This was not because they were the strongest or the richest, but because they were connected to the Kaaba. They fed pilgrims, hosted travelers, and managed the rituals of Hajj, even after those rituals had been corrupted by idol worship. Still, the honor remained. Still, the protection remained. Allah allowed them to hold this position even while they drifted away from the faith of Ibrahim as part of a larger plan unfolding slowly through time. Now consider the city they lived in. Makkah was not built for comfort. It had no rivers, no green valleys, no farmland to sustain its people. Other cities survived through agriculture or military power. Makkah had neither. The Quran itself recalls the prayer of Ibrahim asking Allah to provide for this barren land because without divine intervention it would fail. And yet, somehow, it flourished. Trade flowed through it. Goods arrived from distant lands. Hunger touched Arabia again and again, but Makkah endured. Fear ruled the desert, where raids and bloodshed were normal, but Makkah remained a place where even enemies lowered their weapons. This was not coincidence. It was not strategy. It was protection written into destiny. Allah turned this lifeless valley into a hub of movement by tying it to the Kaaba. Pilgrims came from every direction, bringing commerce with them. Respect for the sacred house spilled over into respect for its people. The Quraysh became merchants not because they were adventurous, but because Allah made their roads safe. Their winter journeys to Yemen and their summer journeys to the lands of Sham crossed territories where other tribes were attacked without mercy, yet the Quraysh passed untouched. No guards, no armies. Just the weight of a sacred trust that others feared to violate. When Allah mentions these journeys in the surah, He is not praising their business skill. He is exposing the invisible hand that made their success possible. This is what makes Surah Quraysh so powerful. It forces a question without directly asking it. If your city should not survive but does, if your trade should be destroyed but flourishes, if your people should live in fear but sleep in peace, then who is really in control of your life? The Quraysh lived inside a miracle they no longer noticed. Protection had become routine. Blessings had become background noise. And this surah arrives to interrupt that comfort before it turns into evidence against them. The The Quran then draws attention to something the Quraysh knew better than anyone else, even if they never stopped to truly reflect on it. Their great journeys, the rhythm of their entire economy, the winter route south toward Yemen and the summer route north toward the lands of Greater Syria, these were not casual trips. They were long, dangerous expeditions across deserts controlled by rival tribes, bandits, and warlords who thought nothing of spilling blood for profit. For most Arabs, traveling even a short distance meant real risk. Caravans were attacked, families were wiped out, and goods were stolen without consequence. Yet the caravans of Quresh moved as if wrapped in an invisible shield. Their camels crossed hostile land without fear. Their merchants slept at night without weapons drawn. Their goods reached foreign markets untouched. This was not normal. Everyone in Arabia knew it was not normal, and yet the Quraysh accepted it as if it were their natural right. What made these journeys even more remarkable was that the Quraysh did not possess military power to protect themselves. They were traders, not conquerors. They did not dominate the land through force. What protected them was reputation and reverence tied directly to the Kaaba. The tribes along these routes knew that harming the Quraysh meant provoking the Lord of the sacred house. The memory of divine punishment was fresh, alive in stories passed from mouth to mouth. To attack the Quraysh was not just a political risk, it was a spiritual one. So roads opened, borders softened, and hands stayed away from their caravans. Allah made fear fall into the hearts of others so that the Quraysh could walk safely, and he did so without announcing it, without spectacle, quietly shaping reality around them. Then comes the shadow that looms over this entire chapter, even though it is never named directly. The event of the elephant. The moment when the Kaaba was threatened by a power far greater than anything the Quraysh could resist. Abraha came with an army that no Arab tribe could stop, supported by elephants that inspired terror wherever they marched. The Quraysh did not fight. They did not defend the Kaaba with weapons. They stepped back, powerless, and placed their trust in the Lord of the house. What followed was not a battle but a message. Allah destroyed that army completely, not through human strength, but through forces that came from where no one expected. Small creatures became instruments of divine will. The mighty were reduced to nothing. The impossible became reality. That event changed everything. Arabia understood that the Kaaba was under direct divine protection. The Quraysh understood it too, even if they never fully admitted it to themselves. Their status was elevated overnight. Their safety was reinforced. Their trade expanded. No ruler wanted to provoke the fate of Abraha. No tribe wanted to test that protection again. Surah Quraysh is revealed in the aftermath of that miracle, when its echo still rang in the collective memory of the people. Allah is reminding them that the comfort they enjoy is not random. It is directly connected to that act of protection. Their entire way of life stands on the foundation of a mercy they did nothing to earn. Allah then narrows the focus even further, stripping away any illusion of independence or self-sufficiency. He reminds them that he fed them against hunger and secured them from fear. Hunger and fear are the two forces that break civilizations. Hunger drives people to desperation. Fear destroys stability and trust. Arabia knew both intimately. Droughts were frequent. Famine was never far away. Tribes fought endlessly over resources. Children grew up surrounded by violence and uncertainty. Yet Makkah stood apart. Food reached it even when surrounding regions suffered. Trade continued even when chaos spread. People came to Makkah seeking safety because it was known as a sanctuary. This was not because the Quraysh were generous or clever. It was because Allah chose to preserve this city for a purpose far greater than its people realized. Security is one of the rarest blessings, and it is often the least appreciated. When fear is absent, people stop noticing it. When food is available, gratitude fades. The Quraysh lived inside this quiet miracle every single day. They woke up without fear of invasion. They sent their caravans without fear of loss. They raised their children in a city that others hesitated to harm. And yet, instead of seeing these blessings as signs pointing toward Allah, they treated them as proof of their own importance. This is where the surah becomes deeply uncomfortable, because it shows how easy it is to mistake divine mercy for personal entitlement. Allah does not deny them their blessings. He confirms them. He names them clearly. But by doing so, He removes every excuse. Once the source of security and provision is made clear, neutrality disappears. Gratitude becomes an obligation. Worship becomes the only logical response. The Quraysh could no longer claim ignorance. Their lives themselves were evidence. They were living proof of divine care, walking inside a protection they could not replicate or explain. This is the turning point of the surah. Up to this moment, it feels almost descriptive, almost historical. But beneath that surface, pressure is building. Allah is not simply reminding them of what they have. He is reminding them of why they have it. Hunger removed, fear removed, roads opened, enemies restrained, empires warned. All of it tied to the Lord of the sacred house. The question is no longer whether Allah exists or whether He has power. The question is whether the Quraysh will recognize what is already shaping their lives, or whether they will continue to benefit from protection while turning away from the protector. This is why Surah Quraysh feels calm but carries weight. It is mercy before judgment, reminder before accountability. Allah speaks to them while the door is still open, while the blessings are still flowing, while security still surrounds them. Because once gratitude is rejected and worship is refused, the very things that once protected a people can become the evidence against them. There is a moment when blessings become so familiar that they stop feeling like blessings at all. They turn into background noise, something assumed rather than acknowledged, something expected rather than appreciated. This is where the Quraysh slowly found themselves. Protection surrounded them so completely that danger felt distant and theoretical. Provision arrived so consistently that hunger felt like a problem meant for other tribes. Over time, the miracle faded into routine. The extraordinary became ordinary. And when that happens, gratitude is often the first thing to disappear. The Quraysh did not wake up one day and decide to reject Allah outright. It happened gradually, quietly, through neglect rather than open rebellion. They continued their lives, their trade, their rituals, their gatherings, all while forgetting the source of the peace that made those lives possible. Instead of seeing their security as a sign pointing upward, they began to look inward. They attributed success to lineage, to clever negotiation, to inherited honor. They spoke proudly of their ancestors, their tribal unity, their status among the Arabs. The Kaaba, once built as a symbol of pure devotion to the one God, became crowded with idols representing imagined powers. These idols did not protect caravans. They did not repel enemies. They did not send food into a barren valley. And yet the Quraysh convinced themselves that these objects played a role in their safety. This is the strange psychology of comfort. When life feels stable, people invent explanations that flatter themselves, even when reality clearly points elsewhere. What makes this moment especially heavy is that the Quraysh were not ignorant of Allah. They knew His name. They believed He existed. They even acknowledged Him as the Creator in moments of crisis. But acknowledgement without submission is not faith. Knowing about Allah while refusing to devote worship to Him alone is a contradiction that the Quran repeatedly exposes. The Quraysh lived inside that contradiction. They benefited from Allah's protection while directing acts of devotion to idols they carved with their own hands. They stood in the shadow of the Kaaba, the house built by Ibrahim for monotheism, while practicing a religion that emptied it of its purpose. Surah Quraysh confronts this mindset without shouting. It does not list punishments. It does not recount destroyed nations. Instead, it uses logic so simple it becomes inescapable. If Allah is the one who created the conditions for your survival, then worship belongs to Him alone. This is not a philosophical argument, it is a practical one. The surah ties belief directly to lived experience. It points to food on their tables and safety on their roads and asks them to connect the dots. And when people refuse to make that connection, it reveals something deeper than ignorance. It reveals arrogance. Then comes the command, clear and uncompromising, yet remarkably brief. Worship the Lord of this house. Not the house itself, not the idols inside it, not the traditions wrapped around it. The Lord of the house, the one who owns it, protects it, and gives it meaning. This command cuts through every excuse. It strips away the layers of culture and habit and leaves a single question behind. Who are you truly devoted to? The Quraysh had no shortage of rituals. They circumambulated the Kaaba. They honored pilgrims. They spoke of sacredness. But rituals without sincerity are empty. Allah was calling them back to the foundation they had abandoned. There is also a quiet shift in responsibility here. Once blessings are identified as coming from Allah, neutrality is no longer possible. Silence becomes a choice. Indifference becomes rejection. The Quraysh were being told that their comfort carried expectations. Security was not a reward for righteousness. It was an opportunity to respond with worship. And opportunity, when wasted, turns into evidence. This is where the surah becomes deeply uncomfortable, not only for them, but for anyone who lives in ease. Because it suggests that the more stable your life is, the heavier your accountability may be. The Quraysh were proud of their independence, yet Surah Quraysh exposes how dependent they truly were. Dependent on protection they could not manufacture, dependent on provision they could not guarantee, dependent on fear being placed in the hearts of others by a force they could not control. Their entire system rested on something beyond their reach, and instead of responding with humility, they doubled down on false confidence. This is not just a historical failure, it is a human one. People rarely reject truth because it is unclear. More often, they reject it because accepting it would require change. Surah Quraysh, in these verses, is not only speaking to a tribe in Makkah, it is speaking to every community that enjoys stability and forgets to ask why. It speaks to people who feel safe enough to delay reflection, comfortable enough to postpone gratitude. It reminds us that worship is not a cultural accessory, but a response to reality. The Quraysh were being asked to align their devotion with the truth already shaping their lives, and they were being asked before consequences arrived, while mercy was still extended. This is what makes these verses both gentle and severe. Gentle in tone, severe in implication. Allah is not threatening them yet. He is reminding them. But reminders are not given forever. They are given when there is still time to respond. The Quraysh were standing at that moment, protected, fed, secure, honored, and being asked to recognize the source of it all. What they would do next would determine whether those blessings remained signs of mercy or became witnesses against them. There is a quiet irony at the heart of the Quraysh story that Surah Quraysh allows you to feel without spelling it out bluntly. The very tribe that benefited most from the sanctity of the Kaaba slowly became one of the greatest obstacles to its true purpose. They guarded the house physically while hollowing it out spiritually. They cleaned its courtyard while filling its interior with idols. They spoke proudly of being the people of Allah's sanctuary while directing their devotion to objects that neither heard nor helped. This contradiction did not happen overnight. It grew slowly, wrapped in tradition, normalized through habit, and protected by comfort. And because the Quraysh did not immediately lose their security, they convinced themselves that their path must be acceptable. The idols of the Quraysh were not just religious symbols, they were psychological shields. As long as the idols stood, the Quraysh could claim they were still a religious people, still connected to the divine, still honoring the sacred. But Surah Quraysh quietly dismantles that illusion. It does not argue against the idols directly. It does something far more devastating. It ignores them completely. Allah does not say the idols failed to feed you. He says He fed you. He does not say the idols protected your caravans, he says he secured you from fear. By removing the idols from the narrative altogether, the Quran exposes their irrelevance. They were never part of the equation. They were decorations placed on top of a reality entirely governed by Allah. This is where the surah becomes a mirror rather than a lecture. It forces the Quraysh to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their way of life was built on benefits they could not trace back to their gods. Their idols did not prevent famine. Their idols did not stop Abraha. Their idols did not open trade routes or soften enemy hearts. Every major turning point in their survival pointed in one direction, and yet they refused to follow that direction to its conclusion. The danger of this refusal lies not in disbelief, but in selective belief. They believed in Allah when it was convenient and sidelined him when it threatened their authority or traditions. The Quran repeatedly warns against this kind of faith because it corrodes sincerity from the inside. When worship becomes mixed with ego, control, and cultural pride, it stops being worship at all. The Quraysh enjoyed being seen as custodians of the Kaaba. It gave them status, influence, and income. Pure monotheism threatened that structure. If all people were equal before one God, tribal hierarchy weakened. If worship belonged to Allah alone, idols lost relevance. If accountability was real, privilege became a burden instead of an advantage. Rejecting the message was not about disbelief, it was about preserving power. Surah Quraysh carries a warning precisely because it does not announce one loudly. It reminds them that blessings are not guarantees. Protection is not permanent by default. Security is not unconditional. Throughout the Quran, Allah shows that when people persistently deny the source of their blessings, those blessings can be withdrawn in ways that shock and humble. Nations before the Quraysh were stronger, richer, and more advanced, yet they collapsed when gratitude turned into arrogance. The Quraysh were being told, gently but clearly, that they were not exempt from this pattern. This warning is made heavier by its timing. Surah Quraysh comes before the public mission of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reaches its peak. It is as if Allah is laying out the evidence in advance. He is establishing the logic before the call intensifies. When the message of Islam arrives openly, the Quraysh will not be able to claim they were surprised. Their own lives had already been testifying against them. Their safety, their food, their trade, their honor, all of it had been pointing toward one conclusion: worship the Lord of this house alone. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, began calling the Quraysh to Islam, Surah Quraysh transformed from a reminder into an accusation. The same tribe that Allah had protected now stood in opposition to his messenger. The same people who lived off divine mercy now mocked the one sent to guide them. This shift reveals how deeply entitlement had taken root. Instead of seeing the prophet as a continuation of the legacy of Ibrahim, they saw him as a threat to their control. Instead of responding to the call with humility, they responded with denial, hostility, and ridicule. What makes this moment especially striking is that Allah did not immediately remove their blessings. Makkah remained protected for years. Trade continued. Security held. This delay was not approval. It was mercy. Allah gave the Quraysh time to reflect, time to reconsider, time to return. The Quran and authentic hadith show that Allah is patient, not because injustice is acceptable, but because repentance is always possible while life remains. Every day the Quraysh woke up in safety was another chance. Every successful journey was another reminder. Every pilgrim who arrived unharmed was another sign. Yet many among them doubled down. They used their security to persecute believers. They used their influence to isolate the Prophet. They used the sanctity of Makkah to justify cruelty while benefiting from the peace it provided. This is where the warning of Surah Quraysh becomes painfully clear. Blessings that are not met with gratitude can be transformed into tools of oppression. When people forget the source of their power, they misuse it. And when that happens, divine patience does not mean divine neglect. Surah Quraysh stands as proof that Allah warns before He judges. He reminds before He holds accountable. He lists favors before He questions loyalty. The Quraysh were not destroyed suddenly like other nations. Their trial unfolded over time, and when consequences eventually arrived, history recorded that it was not because Allah was unjust, but because reminders had been ignored for too long. This message extends far beyond one tribe in one city. It speaks to any people who grow comfortable enough to believe stability is self-made. It speaks to those who inherit peace and assume it is permanent. It speaks to hearts that delay obedience because life feels secure. The Quresh are not just a historical case, they are a warning preserved in revelation. A reminder that when gratitude fades and worship is compromised, blessings do not disappear quietly. They testify, they wait, and when the moment comes, they speak. As the message of Islam began to spread openly through Makkah, Surah Quraysh took on a weight that could no longer be ignored. What had once sounded like a calm reminder now stood as a silent witness against a people who knew exactly what was being asked of them. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was not introducing a foreign god or an unfamiliar idea. He was calling them back to the very Lord who had fed them, protected them, and elevated them above the rest of Arabia. This is what made their rejection so serious. It was not a misunderstanding. It was recognition followed by refusal. They understood the logic of the message. They felt the pressure of its truth. And they chose to resist it, because accepting it would have required surrendering pride, power, and long-standing social control. The Quraysh were now facing a test far greater than famine or fear. They were being tested with truth. The Quran confronted them with their own history, their own privileges, and their own contradictions. Every verse that reminded them of Allah's favors tightened the moral grip around their conscience. They could no longer claim that idols were responsible for their success. They could no longer claim ignorance of the one who protected the house. The Prophet's message aligned perfectly with the logic already embedded in their lives. Worship the Lord of the house alone. Abandon false intermediaries. Recognize that security is a trust, not a trophy. And yet, many among the Quraysh hardened their hearts. They used the very safety Allah granted them to suppress the believers. They mocked the message in the same sanctuary that Allah had made inviolable. They relied on the protection of Makkah while actively rejecting the purpose for which it was protected. This is one of the most sobering lessons of Surah Quraysh. Divine blessings do not automatically soften hearts. In some cases, they expose what was already there. Comfort can lead to humility, or it can deepen arrogance. The Quraysh chose the latter, believing that their status would shield them from consequences just as it had shielded them from enemies. Still, Allah did not rush punishment. Years passed, the call continued, signs multiplied. The Quran was recited openly in the same city where idols stood untouched. This delay was mercy, not weakness. Authentic hadith make it clear that Allah is forbearing, giving people time to return, time to reflect, time to change direction before judgment arrives. Every peaceful night in Makkah, every successful trade season, every safe pilgrimage was another extension of that mercy. The Quraysh were being carried by patience they did not appreciate. Eventually, history reached its turning point. The believers, persecuted and driven out, returned not as refugees, but as a disciplined, principled community. When Makkah was opened without bloodshed, the irony became complete. The city that had been protected by Allah for generations was now cleansed of idols by the very message the Quraysh had resisted. The Kaaba was restored to its original purpose, worship of Allah alone. And many among the Quraysh, seeing the truth made undeniable, finally surrendered their pride and embraced Islam. This, too, was mercy. Even after years of rejection, the door remained open. Surah Quraysh, when viewed through this outcome, reveals its final layer. It was not only a warning, it was an invitation. a chance for the Quraysh to align themselves with the destiny Allah had already written for Makkah. Those who accepted were honored. Those who delayed learned that protection without obedience is never permanent. Allah fulfilled his promise to preserve the house, but he did not guarantee the spiritual safety of those who misused it. The message of this surah does not belong to the past. It speaks directly to anyone living in stability, safety, and routine today. It speaks to societies that enjoy peace while others suffer, to individuals who have food, shelter, and security yet postpone gratitude and obedience. It asks the same uncomfortable question it asked the Quraysh. Who do you credit for the life you are living? And more importantly, how do you respond to that reality? Surah Quraysh teaches that worship is not limited to ritual acts. It is recognition, alignment, and humility. It is understanding that comfort is not proof of righteousness, but an opportunity for responsibility. Hunger and fear are easy teachers. Security and abundance are far more dangerous tests. The Quraysh passed through famine and threat with patience, but many stumbled when ease surrounded them. That is why the Quran highlights these blessings so clearly. Because forgetting the source of ease is often the first step toward moral collapse. This surah also reminds us that Allah's reminders are precise. He speaks to people through their lived reality. He does not overwhelm them with abstract demands. He points to what they already know, what they already experience, and what they already depend on. Food on the table, safety in the streets, stability in daily life. These are not small things. They are signs, and signs demand response. In the end, Surah Quraysh leaves us with no dramatic conclusion, no detailed scene of punishment or reward. It ends quietly, just as it began. But that quiet ending is intentional. It leaves space for reflection. It leaves the listener alone with a question that cannot be avoided. If Allah is the one who removed hunger and fear from your life, what have you given him in return? That question echoes across time. It echoed in Makkah before the rise of Islam. It echoes in every place where people live in comfort today. And it will continue to echo until the day when all blessings are accounted for, and every soul is asked not what it claimed, but what it recognized and how it responded.